the church, and when the women and children tried to escape, they shot them with bows and arrows and threw the bodies back into the church to be burned. So I believe about 30 people died, and it was attributed to the riots. Probably very similar attribution. I don't know if you've been following the story in Benghazi, where Clinton and her cronies and Obama alleged that there was a release of a Innocence of Muslims video which disrespected the Prophet. And they tried to insert that into the mainstream media as an explanation for spontaneous riots occurring outside the American compound in Benghazi, as an explanation for what ultimately turned into a sodomized rape and torture of the US ambassador to Benghazi, Christopher Stevens. So that's quite a mouthful, but were you aware of the story behind the Benghazi rape and murder of Christopher Stevens?
Yes, I was.
And so going back to this church, what I'm doing, and I'm not, it's wrong to describe this as rabble rousing, but there's an element here. We had a discussion last week, if you recollect, about how the Christian community might be activated. I'm very ready, and I'm sure Field is as well, to educate the Christian community globally, perhaps with your help, to what really happened at Eldoret, because this was a crime, a mass murder, provoked and engineered by your president. And he's got to face justice for this.
Is that a question for Clyde or for me?
It's a rhetorical flourish.
Okay, well, let me handle the rhetorical, and he'll handle the spiritual. David, what just occurred, we're back live, by the way, and I'm going to post what I was just posting to Ginger, and then I'll flesh it out, but I'll read what Ginger is the person who had called me on my cell phone, and I said, Ginger, what occurred was I uploaded a newer version of Livestream an hour ago, and then that's when you asked a rhetorical question, and I saw Clyde look at the camera like you're nuts, which meaning you and I both have a disability, David. We can ask a question that's 37 minutes long, and a normal person says, I got the history, what's the question? But anyway, the answer to what was occurring on the buffering, that was my fault because, and I'm not saying I'm a bad person, but what happened was about an hour before right now, so about an hour ago, I got a notice from Livestream there was a newer version of the software, and it says, would you like to upload it now? And that always scares me because I don't know if Craig's here today. Let me check. Craig Peterson's who I'm looking for, and he is not here. So Craig and Jack Mack and other technologically proficient people sometimes probably think we're kidding about how inept we are technology-wise, but it's just a fact, and I take life as it comes. But what happened was, with a great deal of personal fear, I pushed install now. My concern was how long it took to install it. What I failed to consider, when the live stream new installation was made, it set the camera to a default setting, which is about 488 whatever. And in order to get a good live stream, we have to be on the mobile setting, which is around 168 whatever. So we were getting 3 times as much garbage as our faithful, good word, isn't it? The people who faithfully participate and send us information and come to us for information, they were going out of their minds, not to bring up a song by Little Anthony and the Imperials, but they were going out of their minds because each of these individuals, one was Maranatha, one was Ginger Cookie, one was Mensa, one was Agent McCheese down there in Huntsville, Alabama, or Redstone. So when I went over to the chat room, and the reason I missed it is I was sitting with Clyde, and I'm going to go sit with him again, but I wasn't sitting here seeing all the negative comments about the quality. But when I did, as you noticed, David, it took me about 90 seconds to fix it. So we're back up and running. Everything's normal. And do you have a laconic question for Clyde Holt?
Yes, Field, he answered the question because I asked him if he was aware of the story, the backstory to Innocence of Muslims and the rape and murder of your ambassador to Libya, or Barry Spataro's ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, and he said he was. So what I want to do is make the analogy for the propaganda that is coming out of the White House and the BBC. In the case of Benghazi, what they desperately wanted the American public to believe was that there was a disrespect of the prophet centered out of some place in California, probably by a felon, and I think he's back in jail, who produced this video, Innocence of Muslims. It was barely seen by anyone. It was picked up by the BBC and Hillary Clinton and Susan Rice and all those other vermin. And they apologized profusely on behalf of the American people to the Muslim world that they had no role in the production of that movie. Whereas I think it's very obvious they had a very big role, and they actually financed that production, and it was a propaganda attack on Americans to make the Americans look bad in the case of the Benghazi rape. But back to Elder Rhett, because this is front and center an attack on Christian families, not Muslim families or Hindu families or animist families or any of the other world religions that have substance. It's an attack specifically aimed at Christians and missionaries around the world. And just to repeat, what Obama did, he went out the year before, this, and we're talking January 2008 was the massacre in the church. He went out in the year before to meet with his cousin Odinga, who is a Luo. The Luos are the old traditional slaving tribes that pick up, Christians or Kikuyu and moved them over to Nigeria and sold them into the slave trade. The Luos, after the election, which was, I think, December of 2007, were told by Odinga, directly and indirectly through the propaganda machine back in Chicago, that the election had been rigged. And Odinga should have been either the prime minister or the deputy prime minister or something. And they were given money to buy machetes, presumably bows and arrows and other things, to riot and start attacking and killing Kikuyus. And there was a particular high-value target that relates to our SOS Children's Village exercise, because in Elder Rhett, there is an SOS Children's Village. Am I still on, Phil?
Of course you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. And as long as you're talking about Kenya, weapons, machetes, and intentional disruption of family values, I was just putting in the chat room that it's time for all of us at Abel Danger to reconsider the mega church in Chicago, whose name I believe is Willow Creek. It's got a South Barrington address. Willow Creek. Now what are you doing? David, have you died?
No, I haven't. I realized I had my non-mute unmuted.
Yes, you were making bodily function noises. So don't do that. Otherwise, people will find out that you're human just like they are. What I was going to say is maybe it's time in chapter 16. And of course, I'm not the hammer. I'm just a stream of consciousness. But I just asked Jack Mack. Oh, and he had replied. My question to Jack Mack. Oh, no, I just blew his cover. What I meant to say was I sent an email to Agent McCheese asking, when do I start writing chapter 16? And his response, 15 was killer, only got halfway through before showtime. And this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but I'm not. My problem, from what I contribute to this effort, is my job is getting way too easy, because the bad people are making so many mistakes so fast that I can't even use my own notes. And I've got copious notes for every chapter. I don't know what chapter 15 was, depending on Abel Danger or pf.com. But one of them was close to 40 pages, and I don't believe I used a single note. And I probably have 60 notes. Many of you that I communicate with via email, in the subject line, you'll frequently see an initial, like for instance, if the email subject was McConnell and Hawkins, if it says C16 McConnell and Hawkins, that's the device I use so that when I want to go looking for content for chapter 16, I just have to enter in C16 and everything that I've made a note of comes up. But that chapter that we just finished last night around 10 or 11 o'clock, I don't believe I used a single note, and still I had it too long for your preference, David. But the previous chapter 14, according to Craig Peterson, who I spoke with last night, he said that was 50 pages. And that one I used not a single note. And does that mean like I'm bragging? No, it means quite the opposite. It means that they're lagging. The people that are doing all this evil, and that's the correct word, it's not conspiracy. It is criminal and felonious, but it's beyond that, it's evil. And I'll summarize evil with this. If the global cabal that thinks that somehow they can run the world better than God who created the world, and in chapter 15, in fact, I'm going to go out now and ask any of the people that read the entirety of chapter 15. Towards the very end, there's 3 scriptural quotes. 2 of them I selected because I like them and I thought they applied to how I wanted to end the chapter. One of them I did not select. When I went to Bible Gateway, it was the verse of the day. And I'm going to go retrieve that unless somebody retrieves it for me. It was in First Chronicles, I think, but it's not something I was familiar with. And that's a good example of how I don't write this stuff. Now, if you have to give a cigarette and a blindfold to somebody for writing about female anatomy or male anatomy or pastel colors or old music, yeah, go ahead. But let's not be downtrodden worrying about the metaphors. Let's take a look at the information. Christianity is under attack. Families are under attack. Hindus are under attack. Muslims are under attack. Catholics are under attack. Families are under attack. And most regrettably, innocent little children are under attack by what is now being revealed to be a predominantly female pedophile network. Now somebody else wants to communicate with me. So David, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. So what I'm going to put up now is the profile that is sought in these mothers and nannies of SOS Children's Villages, and then go step by step with Clyde and Field to get their opinion of how subversive this would be in respect of, if there is such a thing, a classical Christian heterosexual marriage with children. So we have at the top here evidence that SOS funding from Christine Marcy and HSBC forfeiture, and just a reminder, HSBC was extorted into coughing up $1.9 billion, which is chump change for HSBC, but it's a huge amount of money if you lose sight of where it's going. Now, it would have got into a variety of pots, but 2 of them are very important for the survival of the United States of America. One is the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which has been in the custody of Christine Marcy and Eric Holder since 1984. And the other has gone into the Treasury Asset Forfeiture Fund, which I think was launched in 1992 to parallel the Department of Justice Fund. Is being used to groom children for pedo-fem, that's pedophile, feminist entrapment and extortion, check out Obama mentors Turdi in Jakarta and Bernardine torture paradigms and practice Dawn in Chicago. Now I'm going to shoot this out into the chat room as a hypothesis field, and I'd love to have your comments. I believe there's a phrase in espionage called dead doubles. And a dead double is where you cruise around the graveyards of the United States or in Indonesia or whatever, and find a child that has died and adopt his persona and personality and papers. I have a feeling that a child called Barry Spatoro was murdered in Jakarta when he was 8 years old in 1969, and his identity was picked up by a child of the same age who had been or was about to be groomed in the same technique as used by SOS Children's Villages mothers and aunties. And remember, the SOS Children's Villages as headquarters was launched in New York in 1950. All SOS mothers must prepare for their tasks through a theoretical basic training course lasting at least 3 months, and follow continuous further training afterwards. Topics covered during initial training include, but are not limited to, environmental education. So these are children as young as 0, i.e. they're newborns, to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And the first thing the mothers in the SOS children's villages teach them is environmental education. And can I have your comments on that as a basis for teaching a child as young as 3 or 4 that's been confiscated from their parents, or their parents have been killed? Over to you, Clyde Orfield.
Clyde's going to handle that one.
Well, I'm not sure how well I can handle it because at the present time, I can't imagine why anybody, or what advantage there would be to teaching a child that young those kinds of things, in as much as a child would have very little understanding of those kinds of things at that age. So I'm kind of in the dark as to why they would do that. I hope somebody can enlighten me about it.
Hey, David.
Well, I think...
David, ask me that question and let me have a run at it.
Okay, why, well, I think I'll phrase it in the words of Clyde. Why would an organization want to teach children as young as 2, 3, or 4 or 5, as a principle, the issues of environmental education? Over to you.
Because they want to take the families out of the kid's paradigm. They want the kid to become a property of the state. If you don't recall having heard this before, Hillary, Diane, Roadhog, Thunderthighs, Clinton, Jefferson, Rockefeller once wrote a book. She's not smart enough to write, I do not believe. And I know of what I speak because we have written 11 of them, and it takes a little bit of focus. In fact, he's writing a book right now. It's about 200 pages, and it's about spiritual truth. But Hillary wrote a book saying it takes a village. Yeah, it takes a village. My response to Hillary Roadhog is it takes a village idiot to look to you for parental advice. You have one child. Notice I didn't say petri dish. You have a child who looks a lot like Webster Hubble, which probably is just poor luck. I don't see anything maternal at all in any picture I've ever seen of her. To be fair, I've never met her, but I feel like I've met her because she's a close confidant of my sister. And it was, in fact, Hillary, Roadhog, Diane, Thunderthighs, whoever she is, and my sister who worked my drone idea along with BEI's QRS-11 idea into a drone attack of 9/11. And David, this goes back to our wondering on Monday, and it was more so you wondering, I understand from the comments I got, but you're wondering if we're making any progress. Well, there's an awful lot of activity out there right now in technical magazines and in alternative media that's talking about the ability to remotely control an airliner up to 30,000 feet. Now, David, they're talking about that in the last month. How long have you and I been talking about that? Do you recall?
Yes.
Yeah, we started talking about that in writing to federal officials on the 10th of December of 2006 when it says, I think you put the words in my computer, but I think it says Captain McConnell says clear the skies. Does that ring a bell?
It does.
Yeah, and that was a ripoff of Ben Sliney saying clear the skies. For those of you who do not remember Ben Sliney, first of all, if you ever want to research anything we've ever done, go to abeldanger.net, go to the search bar and put in the search term. You'll find that facility, which I have nothing to do with, Rooster Cogburn, who is actually Tim Roberts, and Craig Peterson and Mark Carter, and probably to a lesser degree you, David, have done that. I've done nothing with that except used it. But I'm finding more and more when I'm researching stuff to try to stay fairly accurate in the fiction that I write, more and more times when I search for specific things, I come full circle and find out we're the ones that have written the most about it. And that's certainly true of the Strangler Suite. And at some point, the Airline Pilots Association and the FAA and the FBI are going to be asked by some foreign country why they didn't jump on board civil case 1:08-1600 parentheses RMC, because there have been numerous aircraft incidences, which were not incidences at all, they were hits, that occurred after we exposed this information. And off the top of my head, I'll give you several. Adam Air 574 in January of 2007, Kenya 507 in May of 2007, Speedbird 38 in 2009, Turkish 1951 in 2009, Air Africa, an A330 at Tripoli, fatal. That was in probably May, and the flight number 771, if anybody wonders if my brain's working. That was in May of 2010, whereupon I immediately was summoned to London to talk to two officials from Air Africa, and they were trying to get me to be a pilot, and I told them I'd be a lot more useful as a security person than a pilot, but whatever you want. Unfortunately, they were scared off by the security comments, so they didn't offer me a job as a pilot, which I never wanted anyway. I've gotten that out of my system, and I am being absolutely blessed by God. He has not only led me to Plum City, Wisconsin, but he has allowed me to live here in relative peace and harmony for the last 3 years. And that might not seem like a long time, but every day is a new day, and I'm not in control of my days. And I would not wake up in the morning unless he granted me a heartbeat. So I have a great debt to God. And how do I pay that debt? Well, by following him. And I know exactly what Pastor Clyde's thinking right now. He's thinking about 3 things we need to do. We need to deny ourselves, pick up our cross daily, and follow him. Now, I may go off the beaten path, or I may go too far to the left or right, or I might go in the ditch or into the creek. But regardless of what my true footsteps are, my motivation is to follow him, do whatever it is he wants me to do for his people, which are not just Americans, but they are in fact Americans also, as well as North Koreans, Canadians, Rwandans, Ecuadorians. David, you didn't pick to be born in England. You didn't pick to be a white male, Caucasian male, maybe is more politically correct. Who gives a rip? I didn't pick to be born a male. I didn't pick to be born in America, but God worked those details out. And those of us who've been blessed by him inherit, I believe, a obligation to seek him and to serve him. And so that is, in fact, what we are attempting to do here, David. And even though Monday we were giving ourselves C- on grades, I don't think that's accurate. I think we're probably in the B- to B area. We can do better, but we're doing as well as we can. So I think we can hold our head up high, which reminds me, I saw a videotape of myself at a recent constitutional sheriff's meeting, and I never realized how bad a posture or how fat I am. It's either that or that camera was lying, and I don't think the camera was lying, because the other people that I saw looked pretty much just like they looked. So I've decided if I can't get my camera to make me look better than I really look, I think I'll just go to voice only. Over to you, David.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So we've just talked about environmental education is the principal task. Can you just hang on, Phil?
Sure,
just
of course I can.
For a few minutes.
Yeah, I'll just interact with the chat room. I don't know who put this up, Hobby Hunter, but there's a picture of a vacuum truck that just drove about a quarter of a mile in fresh cement. I mean, how long does it take a guy to realize he's in fresh cement? This guy's...
Oh, sorry, I'm back, Phil.
Oh, no, we were having such a great time without you. Couldn't you go call somebody? But anyway, I was just looking at the chat room, and there's a lot of, Mensa's got quite a group of photographs. But anyway, back to the serious stuff. You have the floor, David.
Okay, so we're talking environmental education. So this is considered by the Hillarys and the Obamas and the Bernardine Dawns and the Bill Ayers of the world, the most significant way of communicating to young children, some as young as 2. The most important thing is environmental education. I would suggest that this would be propaganda of what the adults, the mothers and the aunties, which are probably pedophile feminists, would be teaching the very young children is that when they breathe out, they are corrupting the atmosphere because there's a lot of carbon dioxide. Just to give you a flavor, when you breathe in atmospheric carbon dioxide, you're breathing in a concentration of about 400 parts per million, of which maybe 10 parts per million is a result of anthropogenic activity, and the rest is natural background. So it's a very small trace element gas. When that goes through your body or through your lungs, what comes out is 40,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. So these vermin, if they can persuade children that 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is dangerous and could lead to catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, CAGW, just think what they could do with young minds in telling these poor little kids that they are responsible, and their parents who conceived and gave birth to them are responsible for the greatest climatic crime in history, which is global and unstoppable climate change. So that this is sheer propaganda, getting very vulnerable children caught up in this SOS Children's Village, absolutely nothing to do with what is safe and environmentally friendly. In fact, the more carbon dioxide, the better. Anyway, next item. Intercultural education, education for peace. So Clyde, this isn't a question, but just a piece of information. The woman who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931 was the woman who, with her lesbian partner, Ellen Starr, was running the Hull House establishment in Chicago for young children. And she was a socialist and a left-winger, and she was a great friend of Stalin and Mao Zedong, and is probably responsible for the Ukrainian famine, or the Holodomor. And incidentally, Hull House closed down in January of 2011, I believe, as a result of the spotlight shone on it by Field and myself and the network. So this idea of getting peace by propagandizing with children that under no circumstances should they fight back makes them very vulnerable, of course, to sexual assault by adults. And that's part of this education process at SOS Children's Villages around the world, and in Eldoret in particular. Health education, well, the kind of health education that is pushed by Christine Marcy, Field's sister, and Hillary Clinton can be established by understanding that Christine Marcy was in charge of the prison medical program in the United States when she was senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And part of that health education appears to be related to the idea of extracting blood from homosexual prisoners and putting it into a plasma and exporting it to Africa to trigger the HIV eradication of populations in Africa. Musical education, well, if we look at the musical education little Barry Spataro got in Jakarta when he was 8 years old, it's probably the idea of taking a young boy and putting lipstick and a dress on him and getting him to dance provocatively for male sex tourists, because that's what happened to Barry Soetoro when he was being supervised by his male transvestite homosexual prostitute called Turdy, courtesy of his mother Ann Dunham and his stepfather Lolo Soetoro. So musical education, as far as SOS Children's Villages is concerned, is about teaching young boys and young girls to seduce the visitors and the aunties that visit. Pedagogy, well, that's education about education. Developmental psychology. Well, I would think what happens with developmental psychology is the children are shown how, if they can radiate a different persona, they can trick adults into becoming extremely vulnerable to entrapment and extortion. Specific issues of personality development. Well, I think, if I got the pronunciation right, someone like Obama is a chameleon. He can switch on any kind of character he likes because he's a trained actor. He can even be made to appear intelligent. But of course, you have to leave the teleprompter fairly close because his memory, particularly with his habits at night in the White House when the calls are coming through, leaves something to be desired. Now, I've just lost the... let me put that back in again so I can see it.
Meanwhile,
Okay, so go ahead, Phil.
No, Dave, I was just going to fill the dead air, but you go ahead and give us some intelligence.
Okay, personality development. Okay, specific issues and concerns. And remember, let's imagine ourselves in Eldoret in the 10 years prior to the 2008 massacre in the Eldoret church, where there is a college or a school or a village where they're teaching this kind of garbage. So one of the things that's being taught amongst the young people in SOS children's villages in Eldoret are the forms of violence in families. So these children are taken in, they maybe have watched their parents being tortured to death, or they've been the victims of an uncle or an aunt attacking them. And now they're taught at a theoretical level by the mothers and aunties that the classical family, let's say the Christian heterosexual family, and I'm not casting aspersions onto the Muslim heterosexual family, the Buddhist or the Hindu. All I'm saying is this is targeting Christianity. So what these young people will have been taught, I guarantee it, is that just Christian heterosexual families are rife with child abuse and cruelty, and the enemy is the biological parent. And that goes back to the Second World War, where the Hitler Youth was taken, the males and the females were split, and they were propagandized into the betrayal and surveillance of their own biological parents. When they went back home, many of those parents ended up in the concentration camps because of the very efficient programming of the children. So let me just put that back up. I'm sorry to keep putting that up, but it keeps sliding away from me. Neglect, sexuality / sex education, birth control. Again, these young children are being propagandized that sex is for pleasure and they have a duty to provide sexual pleasure to visiting adults. They're taught the basic principles of birth control because they're taught that giving birth is a violation of the sustainability of the earth. And the kinds of people behind this depopulation racket, sort of Malthusian logic, there's a Canadian guy called Maurice Strong. He goes to China and he persuades the communist Chinese that there is a crisis of population. He directly and indirectly, with the Governor Generals of Canada, are responsible for fooling the Chinese into single child families. And I believe 450 million fetuses have been aborted in China. Predominantly, or very frequently, it's the female fetus that gets aborted. And the Chinese now have a standing army of 2 million men ready for World War III. The process of growing independent in children and adolescents. So my guess is that in the 10 years running up to the massacre in the Eldoret church, the local SOS children's villages, young people, were taught to kill heterosexual Christian parents and their children without flinching, and quite possibly to torture them to death in the SOS children's villages. And so when it came to the January riots, they weren't spontaneous riots. They were contrived riots, funded out of Chicago by SOS children's villages in the direct line of control of Barack Obama and his pedophile feminist friends. So here's a little bit of dreaming. Why don't we consider in the United States of America demanding that the Department of Justice treats the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation as a racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization to be tried in the Southern District Court of New York, where I believe James Comey was Attorney General, and have the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation dismantled, and then demand, as a Christian community worldwide, that the identity of the people who pushed the women and children back into the church and Eldoret and set it afire be established, and they be brought to justice as for crimes against humanity. My prediction is that will lead to SOS Children's Villages. How about that for a thought? Over to you, Phil.
What was the thought? Give it to me lucidly or in a laconic fashion.
One, bringing the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation executives into the Southern District Court of New York and charging them as associates of a racketeering, influenced, corrupt organization. I'll stop there. What do you think of that?
Well, is that a suggestion or is that something that's been organized already?
No, it hasn't been organized already. I'm suggesting we do it.
Well, I think that would be the wrong place because the Southeastern District of New York is the birthplace of Mukasey, the former Attorney General Mukasey, whose first name I think it was Michael. I don't even know. He's the guy that was weeping. I don't think he was the Attorney General who left the Southeast District of Court, other Southeast District of New York, excuse me, other Southeast District alumni include Elliot Spitzer. If you remember him, he's the governor who got honey trapped into disappearing. This David Comey. Then there's a guy named Hellerstein. And according to my knowledge, which is incomplete, and I readily admit it, but as far as people sitting on the sidelines and lobbing negative comments in here, I think we should try to keep it positive, and negative comments are welcome elsewhere, not here. Hellerstein apparently is the judge who has been given authority, wrongfully of course, over anything relating to 9/11. So I'd say to take anything relating to 9/11, whether it's HSBC or anything else, I think it's a pipe dream to think you're going to get a good product out of the Southeast District of New York. It's almost as if they think they are the Supreme Court of the land, which maybe is exactly what they think. And that would be a good question for Comey, Spitzer, Mukasey, and Hellerstein. And before I get off that subject, keep in mind that when they had this pipe dream of having KSM's trial in New York, one of the things that we, David and Field, did was we immediately contacted a defense attorney for KSM, and we offered to be witnesses for the defense of him. Not that we know of him to be innocent, but we know of him to be not capable of doing the attack of 9/11 because he didn't have the technology. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, David, I'm not so sure that the Southeast District of New York is a good place for truthful people that are loyal and honest to go thinking they're going to get any just service from the U.S. Department of Injustice. So did I rain on your parade or answer the question, either one?
No, Phil, but my point always with this is not that I expect to get into the Southern District Court of New York, but the fact it's the most powerful court that we have, at least Abel Danger has access to, is the court of public conscience. So I think it's very credible for Americans, having witnessed the role of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation in the fast and furious drug and weapons trafficking, which resulted in the death of ATF agent Brian Terry, is to argue that that's the logical place to put it. Remember, we have the SOS Children's Village headquarters in the United Nations in New York, so that's another contiguous court. But let me just put this up. This is a description of what happened in Rwanda. And my guess is it's very similar to what happened in Kenya, even if the numbers are different. And I'll read it to you. The Republic of Rwanda is one of Africa's smallest countries in East Central Africa. However, although it is a small country, it is rich in resources and economic potential. Yet for decades, it has remained in a densely populated nation of poverty, victimized by bad government and furious tribal hatreds. Interestingly enough, a report published by African Rights indicates that women played a surprisingly active role in some of these executions, and we're talking about the Rwanda genocide. Women of every social category took part in the killings, inflicting cruelty and death on men, other women, and children. They also report that the extent to which women were involved in the murders is unprecedented anywhere in the world. Some women killed with their hands, while others, such as female counselors in Kigali, led the militia to refugees in their hiding places, who then abducted them. Many nurses in the Butari's University Hospital gave the militia and soldiers lists of patients, colleagues, and refugees to be killed. Field, again, this isn't really a question, but your response would be intriguing. The University of Chicago hospitals took on Michelle Obama as Vice President of Community Relations on a salary of $315,000, where that university hospital was engaged in late-term abortions. Do you see any significance in the cruelty visited on the women and the fetuses by the nurses and the medical staff or the witnesses of these abortions, and what was visited on the women and children in Rwanda and presumably in Eldoret? Over to you.
Yeah, I think it's not natural, and I'm, my opinion is no better or worse than anybody else's. Having said that, before people get too anxious to correct David or myself, I would ask them to consider writing 11 books, speaking on the radio for 7 years, and having 3 lawsuits in their hip pocket before they start lobbing hand grenades. My question about the natural behavior of women is gained by having a farm and having lived on a farm since 1990. I can think of no species where the woman or the female does not care for the young up to the point of losing her life to protect her young. Excellent local, and when I say local, I'm in Plum City, Wisconsin. We got a late winter storm that dumped 14 inches of very heavy wet snow all over this area sometime the first week or first 10 days of May. Here's an example of a mother's love. There was a wild Canadian goose that had nested somewhere along the river, and a lot of you are going to see this river. Not a lot of you, but there's 10 or 12 people coming in July. You'll certainly see the river along the shores, somewhere between Pepin, P-E-P-I-N, and Maiden Rock. There was a mother goose that was nesting on her eggs when the 14 inches of snow came, and it was reported to me by a local who witnessed this, that as the snow piled up, it got to be where the only part of the goose that was visible was the neck, because geese have quite a long neck. And fortunately for her, the dimension between the bottom of her body and the beak through which she breathed was greater than 14 inches, but she did not move. And as the snow piled, yes, David, go ahead.
Oh.
Are you dying? Should I call 911?
Sorry, Field, I'm not muted. I'm going to mute myself.
Yes, mute yourself and then beat yourself over the nose with a newspaper, preferably one that hasn't been in a bird cage. Anyway, the point is this goose, and the expression bird brain, we claim that birds aren't smart. Well, the birds on my farm today include bantam chicken hens and roosters, and goats, and dogs, and cats, and guineas, and probably some other species I'm not aware of. Notice when I was talking about that goose, who fortunately had more than 14 inches of vertical rise between her bottom and her beak, She did not abandon her eggs, or if they were born, she didn't abandon her goslings. She stood there and took it. I've seen goats, I've seen sheep, I've seen horses, I've seen cows, I've seen guineas, turkeys, dogs, cats, everything that I've seen on my farm for the last 24 years, even though I've had one, two, three different farms. The mother is always there caring for the young, and the father's down the road. I once had a girl that was getting to the age where males were going to start noticing her. So I took her out and I plopped her on a white fence, and I said, I won't say the girl's name, but she was about 12 or 13. I took her out, I plopped her on a white picket fence, and I said, redacted, I said, I'm going to go turn the male goats out, and we're going to learn something about goat behavior. And she said, okay. And so I went over, the girl goats, about 450 of them were on the pasture, and I went over and let about 8 or 10 males out. And pretty soon some activity started taking place. And I said to her, I said, redacted, what is number 20 doing with number 1503? She said, he's marrying her. And I said, okay, well, let's see how long the marriage lasts. I said, well, I didn't last very long. I said, redacted, what is number 20 doing with number 791? Oh, he's marrying her. And I said, no, he's not. I said, he didn't marry 1502 and he didn't marry 791, but he did some sort of physical activity that resulted in them becoming pregnant. And 5 months and 5 days from today, they will have 1, 2, or 3 little baby goats to take care of, to protect them, to feed them, to shelter them, to clean them. And what do you think number 20 will be doing? And she says, helping them. I said, no, he won't. He'll be out in the lawn grass somewhere eating or sleeping. And I said, we as humans are called to be better than the animals. But unfortunately, here it is in 2013, and the animals, to a large degree, are better than us. The mother geese, the mother dogs, cats, chickens, guineas, turkeys, goats, horses, the mothers protect their young. We have people like Hillary Clinton, my sister, Christine Marcy, Sherry Blair over in England, Michelle Obama. I don't know about Frances Hakey, but let's not give her a clean bill of health yet. These women are not only not maternal, they're killers, and they're cold-blooded killers. And you know what? If I misspeak, any of you women out there who are not cold-blooded killers or the sponsors of cold-blooded killing, you know where to find me. It's 401 Main Street, Plum City. I firmly believe everything I just said, David. I have been very lucky. I have 5 children. I have seen many examples of good mothering. I don't recall personally within my circle of acquaintances. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I do. I just remembered someone I was once betrothed to. Not everybody's meant to be a parent. That's male and female. And I get tired of the argument from young people that I have a right to be a parent. Well, if you have a right to be a parent, you have a responsibility to be a parent. And if you happen to be a male, your responsibility does not end at the point of conception where you're supposed to go lay in the grass and chew your cud. It's to protect your children, protect your spouse, protect your property, and demand that the government that may be governing you proceeds according to the law also. So long-winded answer to your question. I see a bunch of, David, I think it's a fact that there's much more, or there's many more, there's a higher concentration of females now in pedophilia than what I got an 83-year-old guy next to me, Clyde Holt, I'm 63. I think most of us considered pedophilia was generally intergenerational. It's disgusting, but within families, and within 20 miles of where I'm sitting right now, there's a small community that was well known for incest. It's not really a good idea. It is harmful to the children, harmful mentally, and they never recover from that, I reckon. I threw that in because it sounds so Western, like Jimmy Stewart or Alan Ladd might have said. But no, I think these women that are trying to destroy the world, they think the quickest way to do it is destroy the family. And a good way to get started destroying the family is destroying respect for and support for the father, hoping that the father will then be disrespectful to the mothers and the children. Maybe some will, this one will not. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I've just put up a little outline of Bernadine Dawn, who's the archetypal, I would argue, pedophile feminist. Now, she's the clinical associate professor of law and immediate past director / founder of the Children and Family Justice Center at Northwestern University. With Stephen A. Drizin, she is co-founder of the Center on the Wrongful Convictions of Youth. She works to abolish the sentence of life without possibility of parole for juveniles with the Illinois Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Children, and serves on the board of the National Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. Dawn is engaged in research, writing, policy, and advocacy to reduce the incarceration and out-of-home care of youth. Well, I would think, Phil, that this profile, and remember, she has one seminar on the Rwanda genocide and another on torture, paradigms, and practice. And she's been teaching this garbage at Northwestern University in Chicago for, I presume, for decades. And I would say that this is the perfect mentor which explains why Obama is what he is. That is, he, Obama, and his crony wife, or beard, Michelle Obama, have a deep and profound hatred of Christian heterosexuals and their families, and they will kill them where they can. What think you? Over to you.
Which one, me or Clyde?
Either.
Oh, were you listening to him?
I was, but not to the degree I could.
Yeah, he doesn't have an answer. Rather than, that was a 17-minute question, could you give me 15 seconds and I'll give you a laconic answer?
Do you think Bernadine Dawn, in what she's teaching at Northwestern University, is a mentor of Obama that describes or helps to describe Obama's motivation today?
Yes, and I think that she's another terrible, horrid, repulsive abomination example. And I'm not sure if she's a mother or not. I certainly hope not, because I would cringe to think of who might have been involved in that process and how unpleasant it may have been. However, she may be a mother, but she's sure poisoning the minds of a lot of people. And she and her beard, Ayers, whatever his name is, there's a lot of us who have served the United States of America that wouldn't mind bumping into him on the streets of Chicago and expressing to him physically what we think of him stomping on the flag of the United States of America. It reminds me of something I saw this morning or last night about a recent speaking event where Michelle Obama, and I'm reaching out to the chat room now, surely somebody in the chat room saw the same thing I did this morning or last night, where Michelle Obama was speaking and she was being heckled, and her response to the hecklers were, "Listen to me or I'll leave. By all means, please leave. Get out of the country and take your excrement with you. You have a very bad attitude, Michelle. You have, since you got a free ride at Princeton." And I really wonder why Princeton pops up so often when we're talking about people who are treasonous towards the United States of America. And I'm not suggesting that Petraeus was treasonous. I don't understand that. He's certainly involved on one side or the other, but it doesn't look good when he's at the Bilderbergers today. Petraeus got an advanced degree from Princeton, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What's her name got sent to Princeton by Henry Bynum, I think it was. Feel free to correct me on that one, David. Another Princeton graduate, Mueller, Robert Swan Mueller III, who's about ready to be replaced as the director of the FBI. And he hasn't been a friend to America since he was over in Vietnam as a Marine Corps officer, where he was running a black market. Now, I think that's a wonderful place to find somebody to run the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For those naive enough to think that that bureau serves the interest of we the people, I think it may serve the interest of they the bankers. But no, I think that Bernadette Dorn is filled with hate, rage, envy, and I think hate, rage, and envy identify some of the attributes of my sister and of Hillary Clinton. And I will now close this little comment with what I think is Jeremiah 5:31. It says, "But what will you do in the end?" And if somebody wants to check and see if Jeremiah 5:31 does say, "What will you do in the end?" I'm taking that out of context, and I'm not changing the words, the inspired words of God spoken through the prophet Jeremiah, which is the longest book in the Bible according to my meager understanding. But I would say to Hillary, to Bernadette, or Bernadine, whoever this woman is, who, by the way, her name's not Dorn, it's Dornstein. But anyway, she can call herself what she wants. I call them hate-filled, envious, they're patriophobic, if that's a word. They hate fathers. And I think rather than one gender hating the other, why don't you just understand who it was that installed your factory equipment and thank God that you have what you have and you can use what you use. And if you use it to serve yourself, you'll have a question at the end of your life is, why did I do that? And if you use it to serve him or serve strangers or serve innocents or fragile or elderly people in need, I think you will be given a reward. So, David, did I answer your question or just put you to sleep?
No, Field. These are tough issues to both question and get a laconic answer, but we progress. So going back to the original letter that went out this morning, we've coined this acronym TRECK, which stands for Tibet, Rwanda, East Timor, Cambodia, and Kenya, and the genocides associated with them, which we can now attribute, I believe, to funding by the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation, which was founded in 1865 by David Cameron's great-great-grandfather, Sir Ewan Cameron, at least if he was the boss in London at the time. And let's go piece by piece. I'm talking about Tibet. Now, in 1959, China invaded Tibet. It would have done so when Maurice Strong was, I believe, 1927, 59, 32 years old, at a time when Maurice Strong's cousin, who was a pedophile feminist and frequent visitor to Hull House in Chicago, was cozying up to Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong apparently was managed by British intelligence and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank through the women that surrounded him who acted as pedophile pimps. So Mao Zedong would be provided with a steady supply of young girls that he would rape and torture and then discard, and for all I know, those children were killed. But of course, every move that he would make would be filmed by the people who needed to control him. And of course, this is very dangerous. I mean, the man is evil and dumb and stupid. That's accepted. Anyone who embraces socialism has to be. But he becomes infinitely more dangerous if he's extorted into the kinds of genocides that he was responsible for, including Tibet, because of fear that the pictures that have been taken of him abusing young Chinese women, and for all I know, Tibetan women, were exposed to the public at large, because irrespective of the loyalty of the communist cadres for the great leader, they would tear him to pieces. And it's a bit like the fate of people who get into the prison system set up by your sister and Jamie Gorelick in the United States, if they're found to be practicing pedophiles or latent or covert pedophiles. So today, this is SOS Children's Villages, we have 11,000 Tibetan children in our care. SOS Children has built 8 villages, including the largest SOS Children's village in the world, and 7 schools to help them. The schools are open to all Tibetan children, including those whose parents may have survived with them. Now, a question, Clyde and Field, don't you think that's dangerous on the Tibetan border to have children being programmed by these pedophile feminist aunties and mothers? Over to you.
I'll answer first and then turn it over to Pastor Clyde and go sit with him while he answers. I think it's dangerous to do that anywhere. Most of us at some point figure out that we have an interest in the opposite gender, and most of us, without any instruction from a bunch of organized, unhappy, vengeful, hateful, envious females organized as teachers, most of us can figure out how to procreate. And if we can't figure it out on our own or with a little help from somebody of the opposite gender, at some point you happen to see the dog out in the backyard, and then you say, oh, now I get it. So I think that any type of that type of instruction is better left to the parents. And I am a parent in a blended family. I'll go you one further. It's best left to the nuclear parents, the biological parents. That's not to say that step parents are all to be suspect. I'm a step parent and I would like not to be suspect, but I'm also telling you the truth that when I first started thinking about disrespectful ways of looking at women, I thought about how offensive that would be to me if some other male was disrespectfully looking at my daughters, of which I have this many, 4. So, David, I find it repugnant, and I think it goes back to Hillary's, it takes a village, and once again, my response to Thunder Thighs is it takes a village idiot to listen to Hillary Clinton on anything regarding mothering, parenting, foreign policy, or honoring your oath or answering the call. And if Craig Peterson's here, and I think he is, at some point we're going to get that video from Canton. And that was what I spoke spontaneously and extemporaneously. And I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Dale here in a minute. But David, when you started that question for Clyde and I, you talked about prisons, and what you did not know, and people at live stream saw me smile and look over at him, is among the other things that Pastor Clyde does, or Clyde Holt, as he prefers to be called, he is a jail minister or a prison minister, and he goes into a prison within 50 miles of here weekly, and he tells the truth to these people who really need to hear the encouraging words of hope that he shares with them. And they're not his words, they're words right out of the Bible. So I'll turn it over to Pastor Clyde Holt. Do you remember the question?
Well, I've got this to say about that, I guess. Wherever you find that kind of behavior, wherever you find people teaching anything other than what we have been taught in this country regarding the nuclear family, a mother and a father who care for their children and teach them wisdom, knowledge, help them to mature into people that can handle adulthood in a Christian way, in a right way. Anything other than that is off the chart as far as I'm concerned. And I have no sympathy with it. I believe that children are best taught the matters of living, the matters of lifestyle in the home by a mother and a father, or a father and a mother. And I know that, unfortunately, many children don't have a mother and a father. You know, they don't have both. Some don't have either. But in any case, we're looking at on the top of the pyramid that which is the best, that which God approves and ordained and blesses, and that should be our ideal. And our goal, and anything else, is substandard as far as I'm concerned. And so when you get into teaching children things that are other than good, commonsensical, scriptural ways to handle life, you're doing the wrong thing. I have no sympathy with it.
There's your answer, David. Over to you.
Well, very wise, Clyde, and thank you. I appreciate that because I think your sentiments are shared by 99% of Americans. Unfortunately, they're oblivious to this more subtle arrangement that undermines those principles. And let me give you a for instance. In 1993, the Attorney General of the United States of America was a woman by the name of Janet Reno. And we now know that she was a lesbian pedophile. Her deputy attorney general at the time, and that was a position more recently occupied by James Comey, who's the nominee for FBI director by Obama. Her deputy attorney general was a woman by the name of Jamie Gorelick. And Jamie Gorelick's assistant deputy attorney general was Christine Marcy, Field's sister. Jamie Gorelick and Christine Marcy began or launched or accelerated the expansion of the private prison system. And we have a great deal of circumstantial evidence that those two women helped corrupt the prison system, the Bureau of Prisons Service in the United States, by allowing special privileges to same-sex inmates and guards. And in particular, arranging for Janet Reno to fly around the United States and visit women in cells with their children, their girl children, and abuse them sexually. And the kind of punishment available to Janet Reno and the United States Marshal Service and the guards was changed quite fundamentally in 1994, when Christine Marcy procured a significant number of tasers to be issued not just to female guards, but to the guards in the United States Marshal Service. And you can imagine, and it's almost too horrifying to conceive, how a mother, as Field talked about the mother goose early on, a very touching story in that blizzard, how a mother who, say, an illegal immigrant, she doesn't have the papers, she's got a husband or husbands or men who've inseminated her and then abandoned her with her children, and she's being considered for possible deportation. I would point out that Christine Marcy was the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service in the mid-90s, and therefore literally had the power of life and death over mothers and fathers and families in the United States. So I can imagine nothing more terrifying than a mother with perhaps 3 children in a cell waiting for the possibility of being shipped back to Angola or the Congo or Rwanda, and being given a choice that she could stay if she allowed the Attorney General of the United States to enjoy sexual pleasure with her children, backed up by a taser, which those who don't know about these things apparently deliver a 50,000 volt shock 3 centimeters apart with 2 needles fired into the body of the victim, which stuns the victim. And this is very relevant to the way in which John Benet Ramsey was killed on Christmas Day of 1996, because you can see right below her ear the scorch marks of the taser that presumably was used to stun her. And that was 2 months after the meeting in the Great Hall of Justice by, or attended by, amongst others, Janet Reno, who handed out the Gore Hammer Awards, Jamie Gorelick, a Deputy Attorney General, and Christine Marcy, who received the award for her launch of JPATS, the Justice, Prison and Alien Transportation System, which is the only government airline that flew through 911 but back then in 1996 would be the aircraft used by Christine Marcy and the Joint Automated Booking System to, for example, fly in parole inmates from Canada down to Boulder, Colorado on Christmas Day of 1996, which would normally legitimize the comments on the ransom note, "We represent a small foreign faction." So my guess is that Field's sister and Jamie Gorelick and Janet Reno, after meeting and congratulating themselves at that meeting on the 22nd of October 1996 on the lab day for reinventing government, I believe it would support the argument that Christine Marcy, Jamie Gorelick, and Janet Reno arranged for, let's say hypothetically, someone like Carla Homolka, who's a Bristow-Philiac pedophile, to have parole from her jail in Canada, hop onto a plane, possibly with a few other women of similar ilk, flown by Russell Williams, who was the head or former head of electronic warfare for the Canadian Air Force, and he's now in jail, having pled guilty to a double beating murder. Fly down to Boulder, Colorado, where they would meet their lesbian equivalents at the National Institute of Science and Technology in Boulder, Colorado, drive out to the house of little John Benet Ramsey, who had been alerted that she would get a visit from Santa Claus on Christmas Day, even though her little friend's mother had reminded her that she didn't get visits on Christmas Day. She got them on Christmas Eve from Santa. And hypothetically, I could imagine that the little girl went down and opened the front door, let these people in. I won't go into the details of what happened to her in the basement. But apparently with a ransom note, any child abducted below the age of 15 or 16 in the United States of America requires an immediate alert to the FBI. Now, the FBI in 1996 would have had a laboratory for crime scene analysis in Washington. In 2003, that went out to Quantico. But the FBI laboratory, which presumably was being celebrated on that meeting of August the 22nd of 1996, has the reputation for tainting evidence. Evidence is planted, evidence is removed, evidence is manipulated, evidence is adjusted. And by failing to solve that crime with little John Benet Ramsey, you, that is Americans, have now inherited a FBI whose agents are not to be trusted in the public interest. So I've rattled on a bit. Phil, could you give me 5-10 minutes, because I need to do a little eating and so on, and take over for 5-10 minutes? Over to you.
Of course, every time you have a routine need, you have to bail out on us. So Clyde and I will sit here and work the chat room. And let's go a different direction while David goes out and takes care of his normal bodily functions, which Clyde and I have already taken care of. And another thing is we could take a 5-minute break and Clyde.
Singly, not together soon.
What's that, David?
I was just being a little rude, but never mind. Over to you, Phil.
Oh, no, you've mastered rudeness, but we've come to expect that of you. So you're dismissed, and if I have to hit you over your nose with a rolled up newspaper, this time it'll be from the birdcage. So David is gone, and you might want to mute your mic, David, in case you do something that routinely people that ingest large amounts of high roughage food do. Having said that, if anybody has a question for Clyde Holt, whether it's something biblical or something of Wisconsin folklore, or if anybody has a question for me, I can put the camera on Clyde if the question's for him, and if there's no questions, that's okay too. But let me just see what's going on in the chat room. Mensa Max says, surely this was just a coincidence, was not a way for the University of Chicago to buy favor from the next U.S. Senator representing Illinois by yeah, I can't say that word too much, dramatically increasing his wife's pay to over $300,000 a year for doing relatively nothing all day. Thank you, but I don't have the time to hit that link, Mensa. I wanted to correct David, and I'm not sure he needed correction, but I think so. The dollar figure he quoted for Michelle Obama being the community relations, uh, late-term abortion child killer that she was, David said he thought it was 315,315 per year. I think it was 350 per year. And you know what? Once again, going back to Jeremiah 5:31, which nobody posted, so I'll do it in a minute if I think of it. And if I don't think of it, Clyde Holda hit me over the nose with a rolled up newspaper from the chicken cage. The question in Jeremiah 5:31 is, what will you do in the end? You know, all of our lives are going to end someday. And that doesn't bother me because the condition of this world right now I find repugnant. For those of you who come to Plum City this summer, you're going to see something here you don't see in many parts of America. You're going to see children walking around the streets and the playgrounds apparently unattended. And you're going to think, oh, that's not a good idea. Your kids shouldn't be out there if nobody's watching them. Well, actually, the point is everybody's watching them. The people here, and I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm not a Wisconsinite, I'm not a Badger, I'm not anything else. Because somebody in Wisconsin might see this videotape, I will say I'm a Packers fan. There, I got it out. But no, I can't take credit for anything beautiful about Plum City, but it is a beautiful place. Do we have people that are both good and bad? Yep, sure. So does every other place. But try letting your 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids go out the door and see you later in 2 hours without watching them. It's not a good idea in most places I've been in America, but it works here because this community of 600 people, everybody is watching them, and we don't have police presence in Plum City because we don't need one. There's some people who would say, no, more likely it's you can't afford one. Actually, this community can afford one. It's just we don't need one. And the reason we don't need police officers is we're effectively self-policed because people here, regardless of their spiritual convictions or lack of convictions, their moral compasses are generally pretty good. And I feel very confident when my children, of course, my youngest child's 19, which reminds me, if anybody reminds me when David comes back, I got something to tell him about my youngest child, 19, getting back from China last week and some of her observations. So whoever was discussing the fact that in Revelations it talks about a 200 million or a 100 million man army. I don't remember that. I thought it was 1 million, but it doesn't matter what the number is. China, I believe, has 2 million men in their army. I'd say that's a whole lot of frustrated males. Then I say that because they're killing all the female babies, which I don't understand that at all. But then I guess I'm not meant to understand it, or I would. But I'm going to go to the chat room now and try to figure out if anybody knows.
Feel the reason you don't understand it is because it's an insane concept.
Yes, it is
It's
insane.
an insane concept.
Okay, why do you think it is the Chinese restrict their couples to one child? And what is it about the Chinese culture or the lack of judgment that these parents that are young enough to bear children? Now, that's where we get into different abilities of different genders, but quite frequently in my fiction, I use the term regarding dangerettes of being beyond childbearing years. And generally, you know, it seems like most people having children, the female is 40 or younger. I don't understand, and I'm never going to understand it because I don't want to understand it, but I do not understand why in China they prefer to have a male child than a female child. I'd be happy with any child that's healthy. And I'm speaking from having 5 children, all of which were healthy. Clyde, over to you.
Well, I think the idea that they're following is it's insane. You can't justify it. Why would you want a culture, a society filled with males and no females? In time, over long periods of time, that's going to destroy your culture altogether. In the meanwhile, like you said, you got 100 million or 1 million, whichever it is, very frustrated males because they can't find mates. And the only motivation that I can see for that would be that they're trying to promote homosexuality.
Okay, well, let me just go to the chat room here. Here's a couple of comments, and pretty soon, I'd say in about 2 minutes, David will rear his ugly head and ruin our little chat here. But in the meantime, Sherlock says, I once talked to an OB nurse who suffered extreme post-traumatic stress disorder from work, especially watching doctors killing babies that made it through the unsuccessful abortion. That's will to live and God's will to live. And when you're on the opposite side of God's will, I think you're in big, big trouble, whether you recognize it or not. They used what was called a nutcracker to crack the. I don't want anybody to see Pastor Clyde Holt start crying, so I'll put the camera on me. I can't. I'm not offended at what you're putting up, Sherlock, not at all, because it's true. I can't believe that any human old enough to have a college degree would be willing to crack a child's skull. I would suggest, just like I often have opined laconically, that if these people think that there's too many people in the world and we should have fewer, rather than late-term abortions, why don't some of these people that have that unnatural viewpoint, why don't they perform an abortion at age 67? No, I guess they're only 65 or 6. The 4 names I'm thinking of are Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton, and my sister. They're all born in 1947. They're all roughly 65. If they believe that abortion is okay at 9 months, why stop there? Why don't you abort yourself at 65? It wouldn't bother us. I mean, I think it would bother God because God does not want us to end our own life. That's my understanding. And if anybody wants me to, I'll ask Clyde if I understand correctly. But it clearly states in the 10 Commandments that we're not to commit murder. And of course, then there's people who say, well, what about the soldiers or the Marines that go out and kill people? Murder is defined specifically, and in Jeremiah 5:26, it talks about men who lie in wait to capture men, just like fowlers and their snares, or birders and their bird cages. Maybe there's a reason to have some livestock in confinement. We as Americans don't need, or Canadians, or English, or Rwandans, Kazakhs, Pakistanis, we don't need somebody else telling us what's good for ourselves and our family. As a father, the father and the mother should agree to what they're going to teach the children and how they're going to provide for the children and what they're going to feed the children and how they're going to clothe the children and how they're going to shelter the children. They can't say, whoops, I think I just caused you to be pregnant. Let's wait 9 months and crush its skull. That's offensive, isn't it? And that brings us around to why we write the way we do. And if people like it, it's we. And if people are offended by it, it's me. And I just had this conversation with some woman who called me twice today. And I was at a Bible study for 2.5 hours this morning with Clyde and about 6 or 7 other believers. And I got a call at about 9:15 from this party. And then I got another call around 11, and we were still engaged in a very uplifting and encouraging, I guess that's redundant, isn't it, Bible study, so I didn't take the call either time. But then I did call this party back because I had no idea who she was, and she was trying to tell me information that would help David and I solve 9/11. Not to sound arrogant, but I think David and I do not need any more information at all about 9/11, and perhaps the U.S. Department of Justice would have been prudent to treat civil case 1:08-1600 (RMC) seriously, because if the pill went down bitter the first time, the pill's about 16 times as large, and you're not going to be able to swallow what's coming next. Having said that, let's see if David Hawkins is back from his 9-course meal. David, are you here?
Yes, I am, Phil. Thank you for that break. I'm now fully charged up, ready to go. And I've just put up a link to an article which will help put some faces on these names that are bouncing around. And let me just put that back in. That's right. The Governor General of Canada is to serve as patron of SOS Children's Villages Canada. Pleased to announce that His Excellency, gee, I think this thing slides away from you, on behalf of orphaned and abandoned children, on behalf of orphaned and abandoned children and vulnerable families in more than 130 countries. This endorsement carries with it a long tradition of support from past Canadian Governors General, including the Right Honourable Jean Sauvé, the Right Honourable Romeo Leblanc, the Right Honourable Adrian Clarkson, and the Right Honourable Michael Jean. Adrian Clarkson was born in China, I believe in Hong Kong, fled the Japanese, came to Canada, worked her way up through the CBC, and eventually became the Governor General of Canada. She was succeeded by Michel Jean, who was also a CBC announcer. And Michel Jean was, I believe, a newsreader or something similar during the 9/11 attack, when the CBC helped to massage the public perception of what was going on as a decoy away from the role of Canada in the 9/11 attack. Everyone at SOS Children's Villages Canada is honoured and excited by this recent endorsement. His Excellency's decision to grant organisation patronage is a wonderful acknowledgement and sign of support for the charitable work that we do on behalf of some of society's most vulnerable, stated Peter Dudding, SOS Canada's volunteer president and chair of the board of directors. Well, let's just have a look at this guy, David Johnston, or Johnston, who's now the Governor General of Canada. Back in 1990-91, he was on the board of the Harvard Board of Overseers at a time when little Barry Switoro, who I think we have to accept is a dead double of a child that was murdered in Jakarta in 1969, needed some money to go to study law at the University of Chicago of Harvard Law School, where he became the editor of the Harvard Law Review. So the man who would have brought Obama to Harvard and helped to build his legend as an eligible candidate, now the Governor General of Canada. Does that matter? Well, it does, because David Johnston is a number of other things. He's a special investor in a company called McDonald Detweiler and Associates of Richmond, British Columbia, which received a contract from the United States Air Force to build the instrument approach procedure, final approach procedure technology needed for decoying drones in war games. War games such as Amalgam Virgo, 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, and Global Guardian on the 10th to the 12th of September 2001. So David Johnston knows a great deal about the technology and encryption systems needed to launch what was a man-in-the-middle attack on the United States government during a phony continuity of government exercise. He would have known that the network time protocols that would have to be sliced and diced on 911 would have normally been stored around the 1995 period, perhaps I've got that wrong, would have been stored in the Department of Commerce office, Secretary Ron Brown. When Ron Brown was murdered in Yugoslavia, and one of his escaping passengers was, I believe, shot in the back of the neck or had a throat cut when she reached hospital.
Are you talking about Ron Brown?
Yes.
No, she was the female flight attendant on that Boeing 737 Air Force variant that was intentionally driven off course and right into the terrain with hopes that by having the airplane crash, they could blame it on the pilots for ineptness, which it was not, and that they could cover up the fact that Ron Brown had a bullet hole in his head, which they did not. And if Craig was not at wrestling practice, he would already put up an x-ray of the cranium of Ron Brown. But the single survivor from the plane crash that was engineered to silence Ron Brown because he wasn't going to play along with the Clinton cabal any longer, and he felt like he was being coerced into doing something he wasn't comfortable with. And so he told the Clintons he wasn't going to do it. And so it appears that someone wanted him dead simply because he did die in a plane crash, but he died before the plane crashed with a bullet hole through his head. The female you're alluding to survived simply because the safest place to be in an airplane that collides with the ground is in the tail section. And she wasn't, there's reasons for that. Number one, you're not at the front of the airplane, which takes the brunt of the collision, as we saw when American Airlines went off a runway down in Little Rock in the storm, where they correctly attributed that to pilot error because the pilot had been up for like 14 or 18 hours and he made some poor judgments. That, by the way, is where we got the policy about cell phones. When the American airline went off the runway there, I think it was Little Rock, and it went into a gully. So nobody at the airport, which had bad visibility, by the way, nobody at the airport was aware the airplane had crashed because it went down into a depression in the ground, which was a valley or a gully. And a bunch of people who survived the crash, meaning they weren't in the front, like the two pilots or the first class passengers who also died as they were in the effective crumple zone. A bunch of the other passengers who survived the crash, you know, they're sitting there in this airplane that's been trashed, and they're going, well, where's the fire department? Where's the ambulances? So they started calling home. They started calling Little Rock TV and radio stations. It was a great embarrassment, not only to American Airlines and the entire airline community, but also to the Little Rock Airport. So that's just something you didn't ask for as a tidbit, David. But regarding the woman who survived, she survived because she was seated in the aft jump seat of the 737, and there's something called the pressure bulkhead of a pressurized airliner, which is always in the back of the cabin behind whatever's the last thing in the cabin. Sometimes it's the flight attendant's jump seat, sometimes it's the galley, sometimes it's a row of latrines, or as they call them, blue rooms, because of the blue fluid. But behind the last place that humans are going to inhabit during a pressurized flight, there's a very stout pressure bulkhead beyond which there is no pressurization, and that tends to be the break point when you collide with the ground frequently. And somebody might wish to put up a couple of pictures of airliner crashes where you see the empennage. One of the most significant examples of that would be Flight 93, where everything was vaporized except the empennage. The empennage being a French word for that triangular, or that's not even right because it's not. There's a left and a right horizontal stabilizer, there's a vertical stabilizer, and those three airfoils control the pitch and not the roll, and the yaw. Pitch and roll are controlled by the empennage. Just like when United 93 was vaporized, it blew the empennage off, which burned a recognizable scarring in the sand in that big hole that Governor Tom Ridge immediately took control of to make sure that any evidence they did not want getting out was spoliated, and that any evidence that they might benefit from putting there was put there. Tom Ridge apparently, and I don't want to sound like a snob, but apparently he was not capable of understanding what was going on. And I think once he figured out what he was part of, he became uncomfortable with that. And that's why after he was elevated from governor of Pennsylvania to the first director of the Department of Homeland Security, once he woke up and smelled the coffee, he immediately got out of government service because he realized it was not the government of the United States he was serving. It was, to some degree, Satan. Having said that, this young lady got out of the wreck because she was sitting right in front of the pressure bulkhead. When the aircraft hit the mountain, the tail of the aircraft came off, and it didn't come off completely, but it was crumpled, and an opening in the sheet metal, which would be aluminum in this case, appeared. And as she either went through the opening or she opened the rear service door, there was some jagged aluminum that cut her calf, C-A-L-F. I was thinking of another part for some reason. Maybe it's the fiction I read. But she cut her calf. It was not threatening. It was just a slight laceration. She was the only one to walk out of that airplane alive. She was picked up by a military ambulance, taken to a military hospital where she died. Now, I'm going to put this out to the chat room. If she died from a slight laceration to the calf, this is a question, and I'm not sure of the answer, although I think I know. I believe that when she died in the military hospital, just like General George Patton died in the military hospital in Germany, in her case, I believe she was cremated. I don't know where the United States military or any other branch of the government comes off cremating human remains without the authorization of the surviving family members. If they did that to any member of my family, they'd find out that they got a tiger by the tail. So the answer to your question is, David, one survivor, they killed her in the hospital. I think they cremated her. And if somebody finds out they did not cremate her, would you please correct me and hold me accountable? Thank you, David. Over to you.
No, I think that's dead on field. And so when Ron Brown died, the following day, his office, Department of Commerce office, was raided by a guy called Ira Sokovitz, who walked out with the network time protocols used by the United States military for continuity of government training exercises with its allies. These technologies were developed by the Brits at the end of the Second World War based on the logic that if the Nazis did invade and shot the Queen or Churchill or whatever, the United Kingdom could fall back its old and traditional Commonwealth relationships, including with the United States, and delegate the tasks and the responsibilities to various leaders in those communities. Obviously, in the United States, it would be the President of the United States and his cabinet, etc. At the end of the Second World War, that project or program should probably have been dismantled in the interests of sovereignty of the allies of the United Kingdom, because it would be very obvious that if you could get inside the delegation of responsibilities and rights and privileges associated with the Crown and get inside those in the United States, in Washington, you could, so to speak, stage a continuity of government exercise and then launch a man-in-the-middle attack and divert the authority of the government of the United States from Congress or the Capitol building with Congress and Senate to usurpers in Chicago. And I could consider hypothetically the role of the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert from Illinois, who was in a helicopter on 911 about presumably to go to Chicago and help the state of Illinois run the government of the United States, be that as it may. So Ira Sokovitz gets into the office of the late Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and steals the top secret network time protocols necessary to subvert a continuity of government exercise. He takes those protocols to the Office of the Small Business Administration whose administrator at the time was a woman by the name of Ginger Lou. So I guess the successor to Ginger Lou would have inherited access to the work time protocols necessary to subvert a continuity of government exercise. The successor to Ginger Lou was a woman by the name of Ada Alvarez, who was the administrator for the Small Business Administration during the second Clinton term. And she would have known how valuable those protocols were from the point of view of someone wanting to subvert the continuity of government exercise. She steps down in January of 2001, and the place occupied by her is not filled. So the custody of those network time protocols is taken over by Field's sister, Christine Marcy. As the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration, she had access to the network time protocols necessary to subvert the continuity of government exercise global guardians on 911. Now, on a photograph taken of the Pentagon bomb, as we've covered many times before, maybe someone could put it up in the chat room, there is a date stamp and a time stamp. The date stamp is consistent 12th of September 2001 with an operation out of Pine Gap in Australia. Field, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Who was in Australia on September the 11th, 2001?
I'm going to give you an answer that's either A or B, either Bill Clinton or Al Gore, and the other one was in Austria. So they both had plausible deniability, and they were distanced from 2001's 9/11. How did I do? Did I get 100%?
Very good. In fact, Bill Clinton arrived unannounced, if that's the right word, a sort of impromptu visit, which seems very suspicious, in Melbourne on the 8th of September 2001. Now, 10 years before that, Julian Assange was found to have hacked into the main Nortel server computer in Melbourne and got into the Pentagon. So 10 years before Bill Clinton shows up in Melbourne on the 8th of September 2001, one of the most dangerous spies in American history, working for the British, was hacked into the Pentagon. So the big question is, after leaving Melbourne on the 8th of September 2001, where did he go to? So this is pure cloud-centric crime scene investigation. We've got two bits of information of relevance. We know that Bill Clinton was in Australia and Al Gore was in Austria, which incidentally is the founding or host country for SOS Children's Villages. So Al Gore is in Austria and Bill Clinton is in Australia. He leaves Melbourne, presumably on the 9th of September 2001, and he goes somewhere. So a question maybe the chat room would like to ponder is, did he fly to Pine Gap, which is the joint Australian-American Command and Control and Signals Intelligence Center that would have access to the cesium clock at the National Physical Laboratory in the custody of Serco for timing signals necessary to equip the red team attackers with perfect synchronicity to combine all of the functions of spot, shoot, snuff, spin, spoil at the crime scenes of 911. So my guess is, Field, that we can allege and let Billy the Clinton, the rapist who got kicked out of Oxford for drug dealing and went to Moscow in 1969 to brief the KGB on the best way of interrogating John Songbird McCain at the Hanoi Hilton, we could say, well, Billy Clinton flew to meet with his co-conspirators at Pine Gap and prepare for the continuity of government exercise using the protocols stolen by Ira Sokovitz and placed in the custody of your sister, Christine Marcy, as the Chief Operating Officer of the Small Business Administration. Why do we care about Christine Marcy? Because as the Chief Operating Officer of the Small Business Administration, Ada Alvarez having stepped down, and the position of administrator not having been filled, she would have had custody of a loan portfolio of about $60 billion of loans to the pedophile feminists who own a significant number of the Small Business Administration 8A companies that had installed, for example, elements of the Strangler suite of weapons in the Boeing aircraft to be hijacked on 911, i.e., your sister field had the technical access, whether she had the technical knowledge is another issue, to the network time protocols necessary for a phony continuity of government exercise to switch from a simulation to a genuine and highly dangerous attempt to overthrow the government of the United States by force. Give my voice a rest. What do you think? Over to you.
Frankly, I wasn't listening. I was busy in the chat room here. I want to thank John Prukup. He found the perfect picture to demonstrate not only the principle of an empennage remaining intact when the rest of an airplane is trashed, but the tail that he found, now he's found TWA 800, and I know a little bit about that. I'll regurgitate if you're still on a break, David. But if you take a look at the Russian helicopter, I think it's Russian. Yep, sure is. It's a Hind 9, Hind, I think. The Russian helicopter behind this empennage of Ron Brown's aircraft, which is a military version of a Boeing 737, the empennage with the horizontal stabilizer and the vertical stabilizer is intact. And that's why, for those of you who ride in the coach section of an airplane, even though you want to be near the front to get off the airplane quickly, you might rethink that. Even if the bathrooms are in the back, you might want to ride in the back, even if it's noisier. For antique aircraft like DC-9s, MD-80s, 727s, the back is always going to be safer because you can't back into a crash zone in an aircraft unless you stall it and go backwards. But you can't go backwards very far before the aircraft will right itself and you'll be going forward again, straight down, unfortunately. So having said that, I wanted to point out to Mensamax that Cray Computers is spelled C-R-A-Y. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And David, if you have not taken a look at the chat room, there's an interesting comment. I'm going to say this, so in fact, we'll get, Clyde Holt doesn't know this is coming either. But this is how our little Abel Danger adventures sometimes find things out quickly. According to Webster Tarpley, Bilderberg 2013 meeting is planning to oust Obama. Well, that's a really good idea. I'm digging it so far, but I don't like what it says next. Install Petraeus for attack on Syria, Iran. I do not wish to see the United States of America deploying their troops anywhere, putting their American bodies at risk. If Craig Peterson was here, he already would have put up a picture of Taylor Morris, the young man from Iowa that went over to Afghanistan and left 4 of his limbs there. He's a young man. He's got a girlfriend, fiance, or wife. He believed in what he was doing. He took his oath. He honored his oath. He answered the call, and he left 4 limbs over there for a bunch of filthy bankers. I hope I never meet Taylor Morris, because I'd start crying at what my country has done to his body. But if Petraeus gets put in a position of authority and commits us to a war for the benefit of the Bilderbergers, I think Petraeus is going to find himself a persona non grata. And I don't know what that means, but it means you can go from being a persona non grata to a target of something quickly. David, now I know what you're going to do, I think you're going to dismiss the idea that the Bilderbergers are going to rip Obama out of office. But there's a lot of entities that need to get Obama out of office because he is the embodiment of he has shown the world that the president of the United States is just a dummy. And I don't mean that intellectually. I mean that like someone else has his hand moving the guy's mouth.
Puppet.
Puppet, thank you. Notice I didn't say monkey or monkey grinder. He said puppet, I said dummy. But
a puppet could be a monkey grinder.
well, wait a minute. Pastor Clyde Holt is going to expound a bit. David, hang on. Go ahead, Clyde.
Well, I just said a puppet could be a monkey grinder. So you could have one person doing both.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I'm sure there's pictures where one monkey's grinding the organ and some other monkeys. If Craig Peterson was here, but I'll dish that off to Mensa Max. Mensa, I'll bet you can find a picture of two monkeys, one dancing and one grinding, which sort of takes us down another road. So, David, to get us back onto this, Hobby Hunter said, "Amen, field nor me." Well, I don't know who Hobby Hunter is, but I'm betting she's responding to my opinion that U.S. soldiers do not need to be chopped up, mentally abused, killed for bankers. And I would say the same is true of Iranian soldiers, of Syrian soldiers, of Tunisian soldiers, of Egyptian soldiers, of Libyan soldiers, of Pakistani, Afghanistan soldiers, of Canadians, of Brits. In 1937, Smedley Darlington Butler, a three-star general in the Marine Corps, said, "War is a racket." Now, I'll bet you that at the very least, Sherlock, if she's here, let's see if Sherlock's here. Looks like she may not be. Oh, there she is. Sherlock, who tends to read the chapters quickly, and there's a lot of comprehension there, which I'm not sure is a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, she might have noticed that I used the term hairy patch. And that's, I'm a cunning linguist, I think, according to Ginger Cookie. But hairy patch was, in fact, the last surviving soldier of World War I. And in 2009, 72 years after Marine General Smedley Darlington Butler said, "War is a racket," Harry Patch says, "War is organized murder and nothing else." You know what? Speaking for the three services I was in, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force, why don't bankers go out and murder each other and leave patriots of every nation out of this? The 26 years I served America, I didn't realize I was serving bankers. My dad did 30 years. He didn't catch on. My mom did a brief couple of years as an Army nurse in World War II. She certainly would not, back in 1943, 44, 45, have dreamed that she was involved in doing something for the United States military for the benefit of a bunch of globalist bankers. When I croak, I may be remembered for nothing other than knowledge of old music and Studebakers. So be it. As long as I'm alive, I'm not letting this rest. And I'm going to go right now, David. I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, never mind. Oh, let me see who did this. S2 Frog. Okay, thank you, S2 Frog. And let's just cut the garbage here. S2 Frog is Randy Barnett from Oklahoma. Oklahoma is the only state that didn't have a single county vote for Barry Soetoro, Punahou 79. Oklahoma has a couple of good politicians. You heard me correctly. I said good. I can't pronounce it, Randy, even though you coached me, but I believe it's, I know it's Frankenstein. I know it ends with Stein. I think it's Bridenstine. There's a congressman down there in Oklahoma who yesterday, and S2, if you can do it. By the way, what S2F stands for, it stands for S2, which is the intelligence branch of a Marine Corps organization, and F is Frog because he used to fly helicopters, CH-46. I think they're called Sea Knights, Randy, SEAKNIGHT. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's the Navy Marine Corps version of what the Army calls Chinooks. They're not the same, but they're similar in that they have two main rotors and they look like a great big frog. And so Randy Barnett is one of our most, I'd say, loyal and energetic supporters who understands not only what we do, but why we do it. And I guess that's pretty hard for some people to understand. I know there's others who do understand what we're doing and why we do it, the way we do it. And well, this is a little personal here, but right here in this building, in this room, I had an elder or the spouse of an elder of my church come in here one day when the shop wasn't open and basically have a brief conversation. And this is not the only time I've had this conversation with a lady or a gentleman. I've had it with both genders, where they say, Field, I really like what you and David communicate and what you publish, but I really don't like the way you do it. And so I told this party right in this room, right behind me back there, I said, well, you know what? David doesn't like the way we do it either. Neither does Agent Vanny, neither does Maranatha. Other people have expressed the wish that we found another way to communicate this. What I told my critic, and I don't do this competitively or out of animosity, what I told this party was I said, if you can think of some other way to get this information out where it's truthful, it's lethally accurate, and yet you don't get killed or sued for libel. And libel is not a concern of David and I because we don't put out stuff that we don't believe to be true. And even if we err occasionally, with 11 books out there, I think it's correct that if somebody wanted to sue us for libel in defending ourselves, we could bring the whole body of 50,000 plus pages of work we've done. And it is work. And if I ever look tired, I can tell you, and he's another one right here. I'll give you a picture of him. He doesn't look tired, by the way, but he was up last night writing Christian instruction until midnight. I was up last night writing whatever it is I do until about 10:30. In fact, it was 10. And I turned it over at 10 o'clock to the two web guys, those being Craig Peterson in Phoenix and Tim Roberts in Tokyo. And, while I was sleeping overnight, they put up the chapter. And so, Randy, I really appreciate your support in this. More importantly, and I want to throw this over to CCW in a favorable way, but between the two of you, I don't remember who wrote first and who wrote second, but between the two of you, you guys did a real favor to Abel Danger about a month ago when you communicated to other third parties what it is that Abel Danger's doing and why we do it this way. And just so I can have the last word before David corrects me, the reason I started doing that, and it was me, not David and I, but the reason I started using all the pastel colors and gender-specific terms and heterosexual behavior is it dawned on me one day that my sister and her circle of perverts, the one thing they have in common is they have lifestyles that are an abomination to God. Abomination to me? Nope. I don't care what they do. Try doing it to one of my kids and you'll wind up with a lump at the very least. And I would do the same thing, David, for your children, for Maranatha's children, for Ginger Cookie's children, even if they're adults capable of defending themselves. One of the videotapes that's going to be sent here very quickly, it's not a videotape, it's a DVD, of a constitutional sheriff's meeting that went on in River Falls, Wisconsin in May. They asked me to get up in front of the camera and speak because the sheriff was getting hoarse and they know that I'm long-winded. And so I got up and in my brief remarks where I found out how fat I am and how bad my posture is. My pasture is great, my posture is lacking. And I understand that. There's two reasons my posture is the way it is. Number one is I used to pull a lot of G's in fighters, which makes fighter pilots' heads go forward and down. And I've seen it in others. I never saw it myself until last week when I got this film. But when I was addressing this sheriff at an open meeting with 250 people and I had a gun evident on my hip, visible, which I think the sheriff actually liked. In fact, I know he did because he said something that, not just me, but he likes having guns out there. But what I told him was I was old enough when I grew up, there were always two heads in every cop car, and it makes me sick to take a look at cop cars, whether they're in cities or whether they're in country. I don't like seeing a single officer in a traffic stop, especially at night. And I frequently will stop where I can observe until the flashing lights go off and the officer drives off. And I made a commitment to that sheriff, and you'll see it when you're checking my posture and my girthliness. I told that sheriff that if I ever happen to have my gun, or whether I didn't have my gun, if somebody does something unkind towards a peace officer, I would find some way of obstructing his or her departure from the scene of the crime. So David, that was a long-winded answer to whatever you said that got me started. So why don't you take it away? We have approximately 40 minutes to go.
Okay, well, thanks for the comment about the film The Falcon and the Snowman. I think I got that right. And that immediately triggers this logic about the Nortel Joint Automated Booking System, which was the of October.
David, I think your Skype's a little fragile.
With the Amazon Internet Movie Database. Oh, all right. Give you a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is that any good?
Yeah, it's very good. And I want to give you a count too. And I'm going to count Navajo. 1 bead, 2 beads, 3 feathers, 4 arrows, 5 beads, 6 papooses, 7 painted ponies, 8 arrowheads, 9 vases of water, and 10 Native Americans. I think we're back to good on Skype. David, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. So you have Bill Clinton showing up 10th of September 2001 in Melbourne, which is the city where Julian Assange in 1991 had managed to hack into the main Nortel server and then on into the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin's secret aircraft defense technology research centers. Now, what should have happened is, in my opinion, the Americans should have demanded that Julian Assange be extradited and then basically put him on trial and shot him. Because when you neglect to deal with breaches of intelligence, you're storing up an awful lot of dead people who are fighting within the United States military because their backs are no longer being checked. So why would we argue that Assange is a dangerous guy? Well, he's obviously a very brilliant computer hacker. He runs rings around little Brucey McConnell, who's Field's sister's boyfriend or whatever it is, who gives her advice on encryption. He's now in the protection of, I think, the Venezuelan embassy in London, but he should be extradited. But the point is, 10 years after he was demonstrably hacking into the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin, you have Billy Clinton, the rapist, showing up in Melbourne on the 10th of September 2001, which is, of course, the 9th of September 2001 in the United States of America. So he gives a presentation to some business group. It'd be very interesting to find out how long that was planned, or whether it was spontaneous, but that's by the by. But when that meeting's over, the next word we get from Clinton is when he rushes home after the 9/11 attack. In Australia, of course, that was on the 12th of September 2001. So we have a gap between the 10th of September, when he's in Melbourne, and the 12th of September in Australia, where he hears of the attack and rush home to glad hand the victims in New York and make him look presidential, which is kind of hard for a rapist, at least once you know he's a rapist. So we know that Julian Assange had hacked into the Pentagon. We know that the bombing of the Pentagon took place on September the 12th, 2001, Australian or Pine Gap time. And the bomb was detonated at, let me address my memory bank, 17:37:19. That's 17 hours, 37 minutes, 19 seconds. Well, ostensibly, at the Pentagon, they thought they were hit at 9:37, 19 seconds. There's an 8-hour time gap. So, Field, because I think you know the answer, can you just explain to the audience where that 8-hour gap might have come from?
That's one of my favorite words, gap. Because Pine Gap, of course, over in Australia is where we used to have the highest level of intelligence communications in the world. That's now been diluted a little bit with, I can't remember, David, I think it's Menwith Hill in England. You can correct me if I got the wrong English place, because Menwith Hill, I believe strongly, and I would bet my life on it right now, that's where the British do their high-level intelligence. And the third leg of this triad would be Buckley Air Force Base, which used to be Buckley Air National Guard Base, which, strangely enough, even though it's an Air Force unit, I say again, unit, Ginger Cookie, just to make sure you're awake, but it's an Air Force unit there at Buckley, but they also have Marine intelligence. And some people would say that's an oxymoron. Oh, yeah? Come down here to 401 Main Street, Plum City, and say that. And if you haven't seen the scene between Junior Bonner and his big brother in their mother's house in the movie Junior Bonner, you probably don't appreciate what I just said. But Junior Bonner's still out there, 1972. Sam Peckinpah, Western. Junior Bonner was a washed-up rodeo cowboy who wanted to have one more good ride for the hometown folks. It's a heartwarming picture of what America once was and shall be once more if we win this thing, and it's not up to us, it's up to God. David, the answer to your question is Pine Gap is on the other side of the timeline. So if there's an 8-hour error, it's simply that we're talking local time at two different places, 8 time zones apart. Is that roughly accurate according to your understanding, David? Back at you.
No, it's slightly less than perfect, Phil, but to err is human and forgive divine.
Okay, well, you keep. Okay, go ahead.
2000. I knew you'd want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, where is the 8 hours? Is it between England and New York? I don't think so. But was it in fact? Oh, wait a minute, David. Did you say to err is human and to forgive divine?
I did.
What about an 8-hour time zone gap between Moscow in the Russian Federation and Washington, D.C.?
You got it, because St. Petersburg is the tracking and telemetry center for GLONASS, which is the Russian equivalent of GPS. And they were able to insert or impute a time stamp delay of 8 hours, i.e. it was presented to the blue team defenders in the Pentagon on their clocks, or at least their digital clocks, that the time in the Pentagon was 17:37, 19 seconds, which would have been extremely confusing if you didn't know that you were being targeted for a war game running out of Australia. And the date stamp, of course, 12th of September, that would be consistent with Pine Gap. So I think what Billy the rapist Clinton did is he flew to Pine Gap into the Signals and Intelligence Command Center, staffed by treasonous Australian and American officers. At least, let me back up here, they may not have known that they were about to commit a treason, because they may have thought they were participating in a legitimate continuity of government exercise where they were trying to disrupt the timing signals available to the people in the Pentagon. To their horror, I imagine subsequently, but to Bill Clinton's great satisfaction, the simulated attack was switched through encryption in the command of the Governor General of Canada over to a real attack. And that explains, and may result in the hanging of Billy the rapist Clinton, the time and the date stamp on the bombing outside the Pentagon. What do you think, Field? Over to you.
Well, you know me, I'm good at thinking on my feet, so let me stand up. Here, okay, I'm standing up. You know what I think? I think these weasels, and I include my sister in that weaselhood, I think these weasels wanted the attack to occur so they could replace the elected disservants of, you heard me correctly, disservants of America, and they could take the shadow government and cram that down our throat. And they're such cowardly weasels that they wanted this to happen on somebody else's watch. I'm doing the math here now. I'm trying to remember if Clinton was in from 93 to 2001, if Clinton got out on January 20th of 2001 with the inauguration of George W. Bush on January 20th of 2001, would it not be weaselly correct that the entire attack of 9/11 was engineered during the Clinton, Gore, Marcy, Rodham administration? Oh, I slipped. I meant misadministration, not to be confused with the Obama regime. But see, they set it all up, and then they want the plan to blow up on somebody else's watch. So they did all the work. And how do I know they did that? Well, because I'm the guy that told Marcy and Hillary how to drone aircraft, and it's not like it's a great big secret. Okay, you ready for this? Here's the steps. I'm going to show you. I'm going to give you a blue and white aircraft. Here's your blue and white aircraft. Open up the front end, pour out the pilots, put in $300,000 worth of guidance, put the front end back on, and now you have a drone. It looks like an airplane. It flies into World Trade 1 and 2, just like an airplane. Everybody can see it. Yes, I saw it. It was a white airplane with a blue nose, and it flew right into that thing, and it said American on the side of it. Listen, if I took a pound of hamburger and I wrote with a magic marker, lamb, does that make the hamburger lamb? Nope. Doesn't matter how you wrap it or what you paint on the outside. It is what it is. And 1 pound of hamburger is still 1 pound of hamburger. One flying vehicle with the pilots poured out is a drone. How long have they had drones? It depends on who they are. The Germans have had them since 1937. The Americans have had them since at least as early as 1943. That drone being a QB-17, it was a failure. The next generation of American drone was the BQ-8. In a rare moment of trying to take credit for something, I don't think anybody in the United States of America ever heard of a BQ-8 until we started talking about it. Is there significance to this? Yes. The BQ-8 was a consolidated Liberator bomber flown by a Navy, in other words, an Air Force bomber flown by a Navy lieutenant. Is that odd? Not necessarily. There are exchange officers not only between branches within countries, but between countries. For instance, one of the most prestigious exchange tours somebody like me could ever get is an exchange tour to fly with the Royal Air Force or the Royal Navy. Same thing for them. The most prestigious thing that an RAF pilot could get is to come over to America and fly. For instance, if they're an Air Force pilot in the Royal Air Force and they got a chance to fly either Marine or Navy aircraft off an aircraft carrier, that is a career-enhancing feather in their cap. But where the rat manure starts to reek is when you figure out that this Air Force airplane was flown by a Navy pilot. The Navy pilot over here in the left seat, not over here in the right seat, the aircraft commander of the BQ-8 on the 12th of August of 1944, and Mensa, would you correct my math if I'm off? The 12th of August, 1944, Joseph Kennedy Jr. In a BQ-8 with 21,000 pounds of Torpax, Torpax explosives in the bomb bays of this B-24. He and his co-pilot were supposed to jump out of the B-24 that had been droned, but back then they had so many handles in the cockpit of an aircraft. For each engine, they had a throttle, they had a mixture, and they had a prop. You got 12 handles to go like this. You really needed humans to fly that airplane, at least to cruise. Once you get it up, so the pilot pushes the power up, the aircraft goes down the runway, takes off, the co-pilot lifts the landing gear, the co-pilot lifts the flaps, the captain or the aircraft commander or the pilot pulls the power back, pulls the props back, and pulls the mixture back to climb power. And then when it gets up and levels off, he leans it out further and slows the props up further and pulls the throttles back further. And then we're cruising. Okay, at that point, the hard part's done in 1944 on August 12th, unless Mensa corrects me. Then what's going to happen is another airplane right behind the BQ-8, which is a Air Force B-24 consolidated 4-engine bomber. Yes, my dad did fly those, not that anyone else. Right behind it, there's an RAF Mosquito, the 2-engine wooden aircraft, by the way, I think that was for speed and also metal shortage in World War II. But it was a pretty sexy airplane by World War II standards. But once again, you got to piece out of place because it's an RAF, Royal Air Force aircraft, and it's got a U.S. Air Force pilot flying it. Now, that's not a problem yet because of exchange pilots. Okay, in this one, you got Joseph Kennedy Jr. in the RAF, and we're the ones that published this. Big deal. You got Elliott Roosevelt. Okay, and they're supposed to do this. When these guys are all set up and the aircraft is targeted for the buzz bomb facilities in France, the crew is supposed to go 1 potato, 3 potato. I missed 2, didn't I? 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato. And that's so the guy in the RAF Mosquito can get his Bell and Howell or Honeywell or whatever the camera is, Super 8, and he can photograph the 2 pilots coming out of the windows of the B-24 before the B-24 goes across the English Channel. And they have parachutes, by the way, unlike the FBI guy who got silenced. I think 10 days ago, 2 FBI guys got pushed out of a helicopter because they were objecting to what happened in the Boston Massacre. Just like Monday of this week, 2 days ago, the fire chief lost his job, and that was covered in chapter 15. But here we go. The 2 pilots go 1 potato, 2 potato, and on 3 potato, they were supposed to jump out, and he would have had the 1 potato, 2 potato time to capture this on film, but that's not what happened. Okay, here's where they jump out. Here's the fuselage. In the fuselage on the 12th of August of 1944, there's 21,000 pounds of Torpex, T-O-R-P-A-X, I believe, explosives. And this weasel of the first magnitude, Elliott Roosevelt, he's sitting back there with his finger on the microphone. And I'll do this for the benefit of CCW, John Prukup, and anyone else who's ever flown an airplane. It's called keying your mic, where you just go click and you don't say anything. I'll demonstrate. This is using your mic. Minneapolis Center, Northwest 44, level 330. This is clicking your mic, click. But that click is transmitted. Okay, here's what happened. 1 potato, 2 potato, click, boom, and 21,000 pounds of explosive sent Joseph Kennedy Jr. and his co-pilot to the promised land. David, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you're dead right, Field, and I think I smell serious problems for Bill Clinton's neck and his nose. I like that picture. So just going back to Julian Assange, we might ask ourselves, and Clyde, perhaps you might think about this, is there any possibility Julian Assange, who had hacked into the Pentagon and Lockheed Martin in 1991 through the Nortel server in Melbourne, is there any possibility that he could have been the subject of the same type of pedophile feminist grooming in Australia as the one we've been discussing with SOS Children's Villages? And unfortunately for the United States of America and Bill Clinton and Julian Assange, here's a little bit of his past. Julian Assange was born in 1971. His birth parents ran a touring theatre company, but his father abandoned them. When Julian was 8 years old, his mother, Christine, married a member of the White Brotherhood, aka the Family, or Santinican Park Association, a private psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Melbourne, Australia. In the 1960s to 80s, the Santinican Park Association received CIA Sandoz LSD 25, which I believe is a mind-altering drug. The psychiatric hospital was part of a New Age colony with about 2,200 members. They were all professionals, psychiatrists, medical doctors, 25% were nurses, lawyers, and ranking civil servants and social workers. The allegations were that these people used their authority to collect, in brackets, kidnap children. As many as 28 children had been collected under the custody of the director, Anne Hamilton Byrne, a theosophist, whatever that is. Children were selected for their Aryan traits. So we have clear evidence that the principal and most successful spies and agents and assassins and saboteurs in the United States today have been subjected to various mind-altering attacks, including drugs, but perhaps most specifically, an education given by feminist pedophiles. So, do you think, Field, that this might have opened the door for the Clintons to run the operation out of Pine Gap, Australia, to get the date right, and the New York linked up to various SOS children's villages, perhaps in the Soviet Union, to get the time right for the bomb outside the Pentagon? Over to you.
Yeah, I think, first of all, with God, all things are possible, but this certainly seems logically possible to me. And Bill Clinton and Al Gore and my sister and Hillary are just the type of people to do something this weaselly. Having said that, David, you were given a spiel on Rwanda. Do you happen to recall who the commander of the UN Assistant Mission for Rwanda, UNAMIR, during the genocide was? And I think off the top of my head, with a wink to someone who sent me this, I think the guy's name was Lieutenant General the Honorable Romeo Dallaire, retired. And the reason I'm asking you is if Rwanda was a genocide, like you say, to destroy families and just destroy humans, it's interesting that in Calgary on the 8th of March of 2003, which is 3 months ago roughly, the SOS Children's Villages 2013 Leadership Luncheon featured guest speaker Lieutenant General the Honorable, let me add 3 letters to that, DIS, the Dishonorable, Lieutenant General the Dishonorable Romeo Dallaire, retired, was a tremendous success thanks to all of our sponsors, guests, and those who made a donation. But were unable to attend. The March 8 event brought together leaders in Calgary's community and helped raise more than $175,000 to support vulnerable children, to support vulnerable children and families around the world. How about to take advantage of vulnerable children and families all around the world? We hope you can join us for the 2nd annual SOS Children Village Leadership Luncheon in 2014. Oh, I think I could. I'd love to know where that is. By the way, to give credit where credit due, poor English, give credit where credit is due. I was thinking in French there is what happened, and which is better than Navajo. It would have been a real train wreck. I think what we do is we take this and we claim that some of our able danger people are going to be there for the SOS Children Villages Leadership Luncheon in 2004, wherever it is. But so often these type of perverts, dare I say weasels, what they do is they come up with a ostensible good thing, which is really in effect a bad thing. And these ostensible orphanages, and that reminds me, I'm not in Campfire Chat right now, I better go look. We do have a member of our organization who either that party, in fact, they are here. We've got some people that are associated with the Children's Village. I won't say in what part of the world they are. I'll say it's somewhere between the southern tip of Argentina and Resolute Bay, Canada. In fact, it's about midway between those points. But I've spoken with this man and wife who have a relationship with I almost said CCW, I meant CVSOS Children's Villages. And they don't have any indication that this is going on at their location. And I hope that's true. And I do know enough about this couple to know when they speak to me, they're telling me the truth. And in fact, unfortunately, David, I used to, and like a lot of other people out there, I used to believe everything I was told. Over the last 7 years, I developed an ability, I think, to determine quickly when I'm being sold a bill of goods or when I'm hearing the truth. And I want to say right now, I'm going to give you every name that I would put my head on a guillotine for. And if I don't mention your name, it's simply that the relationship is not mature enough. But Arizona Sunset, Bucky Badger, Kanama, Pruka, you, me, Ginger Cookie, Hobby Hunter. Oh, yeah, that's right. You told me who you are. Hope for You, James Ken, JJ Joanno, I don't know you yet, but I like what I see. Liberty Hill, yes. Maranatha, yes. Mensa Max, yes. Autopilot of Norway, yes. Oversight, question mark, because I get mixed up with some of these ladies. I think I know who that is. I think she's up in Ottawa. R.K. Dingman, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken, you have a history at the Air Force Academy, and I would stick my neck on a chopping block. S2, Frog, Sherlock. So there's only a couple people who I have not been able to sample long enough to know that if they tell me that the guillotine blade will be stopped 3 inches above my neck, um, the vast majority of the people, I'd go ahead and lay my neck on the chopping block and hope that you're right. And even if you weren't right, it may not be that you were intentionally wrong. It could have been a failure or something that Hillary Clinton might have done. Like, for instance, when she ripped the head off of Takriti al-Barzan, who was the half-brother, correct me if I misspeak, David, but I think he was the half-brother of Saddam Hussein, who lost his head in a hanging when they intentionally gave him too much rope. And so his vertical speed and momentum exceeded the strength of his skeleton to keep his head attached to his spine. And I don't take any pleasure whatsoever in reporting that. A Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Christian, an agnostic, an atheist, alternative lifestyle, normal lifestyle, young, old, middle-aged, male, female, red, yellow, white, blue, brown. We're all creations of God, and our bodies shouldn't be disrespected in that manner. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Field. So I'm quite intrigued, just backing up to this woman, Bernadine Dawn. As you know, she's the mentor of Barack Obama, and I just wanted to check my memory bank to see if she'd actually been to Rwanda. And so, born January the 12th, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, is an activist, academic, and child advocate. I mean, the hypocrisy of these people is incredible. She has traveled on human rights delegations to Colombia, Rwanda, and South Africa. She was the acknowledged leader of the Weather Underground organization. Now, let me just go back to Winnie Mandela. There's a little teenage guy called Stompy who got stomped to death by Winnie Mandela's football team. And Winnie Mandela's preferred method of dispatching victims was to put a rubber tie around their neck, fill it with gasoline, and set fire to it. And this woman is now celebrated by the left and the Obamas and Bernadine Dawn, when in fact she should have been on death row a long time ago. And many of these so-called heroes have feet of clay. But just going back now to Bill Clinton, I'm just trying to work out the timing. So he leaves Melbourne on the 10th of September 2001. He flies to Pine Gap, where he would be profoundly familiar with the Echelon installation in Pine Gap from the period when he was the President of the United States. He would be familiar with the protocols used in continuity of government exercise. He would know, because it was done the day after the murder of Ron Brown, that the network time protocols necessary to improve the chances of a successful overthrow of the government of the United States had been transferred from Ron Brown's office by Ira Sukovitz into the office of the Small Business Administration under Ada Alvarez. No, sorry, Ginger Lou at the time. That would be the time of the killing, 1996, of Ron Brown. From then, they would have gone into the custody of Ginger Lou, who from 1998 to the time Ginger Lou, no, correction, Ada Alvarez stepped down as administrator of the Small Business Administration, it would have been in the joint custody of Ada Alvarez and Field's sister, Christine Marcy, who was Chief Operating Officer of the Small Business Administration. Of the two, one is significantly more dangerous than the other. Christine Marcy, Field's sister, is significantly more dangerous than Ada Alvarez. I imagine the proper procedure is that Ada Alvarez steps down when her replacement is appointed. So the question we have to ask is, why didn't George Bush appoint a new administrator for the small administration between January the 26th, when he was sworn in, of 2001, and September the 11th. Well, maybe that was an oversight, or maybe he told not to. After all, Christine-Marcy is a very scary character. She has access to the Office of Personnel Management, top secret files and background information on every public servant in the United States of America. She would know their sexual preferences and orientation. She would know if they were pedophiles, passive in the sense of downloading child pornography, active in the sense of participating in incidents such as the murder of John Benet Ramsey. Christine-Marcy had received the Gore Hammer Award for flying prisoners and aliens around in Con Air. If you gave her trouble, and I believe Field has a jacket, US Marshal's jacket for his sister, if you gave her trouble, she could say to you, all right, you're not coming up with the kind of information I want or cooperation I want. I'm going to send you to a jail where you will be in a cell with 3 predatory homosexuals without any soap. She could say to a woman who had children, get a visit from the Attorney General. She has the ability to show frames from the snuff film recorded of little John Benet Ramsey. E-4B night watch aircraft that would allow it to fly decoys and drones through war games and continuity of government exercises. Now, Field, can we, it's about 9 minutes to go, can we just speculate, or can you just speculate on a couple of presents you've received from your sister over recent years that I find somewhat enigmatic? Perhaps you could just tell the listeners what those presents were and what, in your opinion, is their significance. Over to you.
Okay, I'll do that, but I'm looking for a picture of the woman in chapter 15. You may recall that she had red hair and she had what looked like wings coming out of her, but I'll give up on her. If somebody can go to chapter 15 and find the picture of the woman I just described, red hair, body paint, and the appearance of artistic wings. You asked me about stuff my sister sent, and I really don't remember all of it, but the first thing she sent, I think I got 3 or 4. Somewhere around November, she announced she was going to be sending a keepsake that I'd bought for my mother, and I didn't know what it was because I thought what I'd gotten my mother was probably, it's called a pin. When people are not engaged, but they're engaged to be engaged, it's called pinning. But anyway, I thought that's what it was because I had a USNA 1971 pin crest, or crest pin. So I thought that's what it was because my memory just failed. And of course, I never gave my pin away because nobody ever captured my heart because I was so ugly, so fat, and had such poor posture. However, having said that, what I had really given my mother was a miniature of my Naval Academy ring. Oh, look, I'm not wearing it because I'm not the ring type, but I'll keep those rings and stick them right up the nostrils of the 23-star fraggers that have not come clean regarding the assassination of Pat Tillman. So in November, for whatever reason, my sister was motivated to return to me property which was clearly mine, that being a miniature Naval Academy ring that I apparently had given my mother and forgotten about. And that would have been taken out of my mother's jewelry box by someone that was not me, without my knowledge or without my permission. Having said that, for whatever reason, this little Naval Academy miniature ring, very low mileage, even though it's 42 years old, came back to me. And the only child at home then was my daughter, now 19, whose name is Katie. And so when the box came, I just handed it off to her, and I said, "This is what is called a family keepsake. You're the youngest kid. You're the only one in the house. It's yours. No tags back." Then, just before New Year's, a Christmas present came, and you didn't hear me misspeak. Just before New Year's, a Christmas present came, and it was a bunch of Chesapeake Bay seafood, cocktail sauce, some types of crab meat, some fish fillets, all of it high-end, dare I say, snobby. So I'm starting to scratch my head, and I remember talking to you about this, David. I mean, why is she now sending me my mother's ring 6 years after my mother died? Why is she sending me stuff at Christmas? And then, did I tell you what she sent me this week, David? I don't think I did.
Yeah, you did, and I find it very odd.
Okay, well, you tell me what she sent me, and then if you get it correct, I'll finish the story.
If I understand correctly, it was a lock of your baby hair.
Yeah, it was a nice card. You know how women are better about this than males. They'll send a card for no reason, which I admire women for that. What it means basically, I was thinking of you. Now, in the case of my sister, it's probably like I was thinking of having you killed. But anyway, for whatever reason, she sent me a very nice card. Nothing in it at all except for a piece of cellophane. My witness is right here. His name's Clyde Holt, and there he is. Sometime in the next week, I'll have him up to my house, and better yet, Friday, I'll bring that to the radio show, David. But anyway, it's like a cellophane holding device that you might put a precious stamp in, like if you're a stamp collector or a numismatic. But it was my mother's handwriting from 1951. It said, Fields Hair, May 1951. And my sister sent me this lock of my own hair, which, as you can see, I no longer have any. But I was surprised to see what color it was, because it's not this jet black. But I was thinking to myself, I was scratching my lock of hair, saying, why would my sister send me a lock of hair from 62 years ago at this time? And her only words, my sister's only handwritten words were, just in case you need it. David, what was your reaction to that?
Well, I'm really puzzled. I'd like to think it was a clue that you're on the right track, or that she's panicking and feeling guilty. I don't know. What does Clyde think?
Let's find out. Put the camera on Clyde. Clyde, okay, the situation is my sister and I have a strange relationship because I'm on God's side of 9/11 and she's on the evil side of 9/11. She sends me my mother's ring, which she took against my permission without my knowledge. And for whatever reason, she sent that in November.
With any comment?
Yeah, I found this in Mom's jewelry box.
Okay.
Well, she forgot the part about I found it in Mom's jewelry box when Mom kicked the bucket 6 years ago. But anyway, having said that, she returned that to me, which is correct and right, just a little late. Then late December, early January, I get a Christmas present. It's a bunch of high-end, dare I say, snobby seafood from Chesapeake. Once again, nice token, but why? Then she sends this past week.
Okay, any comment with the seafood?
Probably Merry Christmas, but you know, Merry Christmas means one thing to Christians,
Yeah.
and Merry Christmas means an entirely different thing to people who do not have a spiritual faith. Merry Christmas to everybody else says, let's wrap up a bunch of things we can't afford in fancy paper, give it to each other, and hope whatever they give us is better than what we give them. Over to you. What do you think my sister's with the hair deal? What is she thinking?
And the only comment with the hair deal was,
Maybe you need it.
maybe you need this.
Yep.
Or just in case you need this.
Yeah, either or.
Well, I'd have to be a mind reader, I guess. But since there have been 3 events like that in relatively rapid succession, I'd say that there's either a possibility, maybe 2 possibilities, and one of them could be true. She's either subconsciously reverting back to better days, which may be an indication that there's something going on in her heart that she may not be at all aware of, and even if she were, she wouldn't know where it was coming from. And I'm just saying that all of us are pilgrims and we are on a journey, and God has a way, strange way sometimes, of bringing us to where He wants us to be. So this could be a subconscious softening of her heart, or she's trying to set you up for something.
Yeah.
and I
Well,
don't know which.
okay. Well, I see we're up against the red button because Mensamax put it up. David, do you want to have any brief final comments? Then I'll give you my final comments on my sister, and then we'll push the red button.
No, that's fine. And thank you for your intuitions. They're valuable to me and field, and look forward to our next encounter.
Okay, don't hang up, David, because if you want to speak personally to Pastor Clyde, he'll be here after the live stream's gone. Regarding my sister, against my instincts, I would have to say that what Pastor Clyde says is, as a mature Christian, is the way to go. Give her credit for maybe having a softening of her heart. Maybe finally, when 3 out of 4 of her nuclear family of 4 are believers, maybe she's starting to see that her path is not the one she should have chosen. And she may be thinking that, I'm part of her way out, and I'm not. But I can direct her that the only way out for somebody at her level of immersion is to get on their knees, seek God, ask for His mercy and kindness, and He will give it to her freely, simply because He will forgive anything that we can possibly do that I'm aware of other than deny Christ. If you deny Christ, you're not going to be forgiven for that. And so if anybody out there doesn't know Jesus as your Savior, that's okay. But if you want to adamantly click your heels together and say Jesus doesn't exist and God is a bunch of hooey, dangerous territory, folks. So I see 3, 2, 1, and I'm looking for there's the push the button, but it's from Javi. I almost pushed it. Push it for all of us. Okay, I've got my finger on the button and I'm going to push it right about as soon as I can see the button come up again. There it is. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, time expired.